It's November 2010, and welcome to episode 4 of The Naked Photo. My name's Rian de Beer. In today's episode, we're going to look at Rolling Ball. It was made in 1960 by Pete Turner. He was also called the Dr. No of color photography because of his cutting-edge darkroom work with color technology. This photograph led to an epiphany for him about intentionality in his photographic work. Pete was born in New York in 1934. He was the only child of a middle-class family, and his connection with photography started really early in his life at the age of 11. Pete actually felt drawn to color work early on, and by the age of 15, he was already dabbling in color photography. You can imagine, age of 15, that's 1949. He once explained why he was drawn to color photography instead of the more universally accepted norm of using black and white for serious fine artwork. And his answer was simple: we see the world in color. Pete went on to study photography at RIT with a group of artists, many of whom would become famous in their own right. He continued to be drawn to color photography as his medium of choice. But he started his career as a photographer in a bit of an ironic way. He got drafted to join the US military, and he got posted to the Army Pictorial Center in New York. And when he arrived, of course, he immediately inquired about the color photographic equipment. And he was promptly told that there's all this brand new Type C color technology, and if he can get it working, he can head up the color division. It was too good an opportunity to pass by, and needless to say, he got the equipment to work. It was a phenomenal opportunity. He was a young man who had to go and take photographs every day to keep equipment functional, with access to, at the time, expensive and scarce equipment not even available to the public yet. Pete had an unprecedented chance to learn color technology, and he spent his time in the darkroom experimenting with techniques, and he built up a set of skills in color that would pretty much be unique to him. Now, if you've ever tried to do color darkroom work, you'll know how complex, how expensive, and how difficult it is to master. He could do color photos like few others could because he'd spent his time in the darkroom, not only to master a highly complex technology, but also to discover its limits and what effects are possible with it. He built up a portfolio of color work in short order, and it wasn't long before he approached publishers with his work. The place where Pete made a name for himself was in commercial work, specifically in jazz music, with his LP covers. It was a great place for color photos, and the most famous cover was probably Wave, where his photo of the giraffe against the red sky became more famous than the music inside the sleeve. This photo was a personal photo he made at the end of an assignment for an oil company. Pete told me that even though he has always done commercial work, he always shoots for himself. Today he's really remembered for those photos that he did for himself. Pete's style matured during the modernist era of the 1950s and 60s. His work reflects it and is pushing his composition towards a simplified, abstract essence. It approaches the look of a 2D graphic design. He looks for and often explicitly express platonic shapes that the modern designers were so obsessed with. He portrays it in strong and simple layers of color juxtaposed next to each other. I find Pete's work very attractive. You can recognize the everyday in his work once you look closely, but it always shows that abstract simplicity that you didn't see before, but you cannot help but recognize as strangely familiar, because what he has made explicit has really always been there latently. As the viewer, you didn't recognize it in real life until he pointed it out to you on the photo. His photos belong to that rare group of photos that inspires me to want eyes that actually see. I asked Pete, why is it that now that we're in the digital age, he's chosen to go back to photos without any manipulation in the digital darkroom? His answer was a fascinating insight into the way that he works. To paraphrase a conversation, he spoke about the explosion of possibilities with the digital era, and the renewed interest in color work that came from that. And then he spoke of the problem of the complete absence of any limitations within the digital workflow. The key here is that when he made photos on slide film, he knew what he wanted to do in the darkroom when he was exposing the photo. And he executed his conception as part of a whole, with the press of the shutter being the first step in a vision that was completed when the print was washed and dried. Pete finds the limitless variability of digital work leads to arbitrary and unintended decisions that's made for the sake of the effect rather than being part of a pre-visualized conception. Pete's answer to this conundrum was really already foreshadowed in his film work. It's a relentless drive towards simplicity. The simplicity of his work relies strongly on his use of color. His work is not about the light and shadow of the black and white world. It's about color tonality. And I think that's really what makes him a fine art color photographer, as opposed to a fine art photographer who just happens to work in color. His work does not just happen to be in color. Color plays a central role in his compositions. That drive towards simplicity and that intentionality is central to his approach. And he became conscious of that intentionality when he made Rolling Ball. The story of Rolling Ball starts at the end of 1959, when Airstream offers him a job to go to Africa for 7 months to photograph their trailers on an epic trip from Cape Town to Cairo. Pete jumped at it. He was getting towards the end of this trip. The year was now 1960, and Pete was driving north from Khartoum in the Sudan towards the Egyptian border at Wadi Halfa. He described to me how he had about 250 miles of desolate desert to cross. There was no road, just a pair of abandoned railway tracks dating from the beginning of the century, when the British thought it was a completely natural thing to build a railway through an empty desert. The desert was the most unphotographic place one can imagine. Brown sand stretching as far as the eye can see. Not even a hill or a dune to break the monotony. This was truly a place where no photos